Let's talk about the Paris Climate Agreement. According to two sources with direct knowledge of the decision, Donald Trump has indeed made the decision to pull the United States out of the U.S. climate agreement. Now they need to figure out sort of the logistics of how to withdraw. There's a couple of options. One is to initiate a full formal withdrawal, which could actually take up to 3 years to complete. The other option is for the United States to exit the underlying United Nations Climate Change Treaty, which would be faster but more extreme, according to a report just from an hour ago from Axios. This is huge. And if for no other reason than that this is actually a way that Donald Trump could undo President Obama's legacy, and it is a more direct path. We've talked about lots of the executive actions which have been symbolic. They're not actually representative of changes to policy. They are sort of indicative of changes in terms of the attitude of the White House. This would actually, first of all, pull the U.S. out of a significant climate agreement, but it would also send a major signal to the world and to the other countries that are part of the Paris Climate Agreement that the United States is not committed to being a part of the solution to the climate crisis, and it could lead to other countries bailing as well, not necessarily because other countries don't want to be part of the solution to the climate crisis, but because other countries, particularly smaller countries, could say, rightly so, we're tiny. If the US is not going to participate, why should we do anything that would cause us to adapt or adjust the sort of day-to-day energy consumption and impact our citizens if our impact on world climate change is so tiny because we're a little country, if the US isn't even going to be party to this? There are only two other countries that aren't supporting this deal. They are Nicaragua and Syria. Not exactly the countries that you would imagine the US wants to throw in with and say, hey, this is the group that is doing the right thing on climate. It's Nicaragua and Syria and the United States of America. The US does not have its you know what together. That's the message that is sent by Donald Trump pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And it reminds me of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has now been ratified by every country except for the United States of America. What can other countries do in response to this if they want to sort of, I don't know if punish is the right word, but push back against the United States? They can do quite a bit. And I've been very clear that trade wars are usually not good for anybody, but other countries can put tariffs on US goods, for example. And by the way, in this context, it's important to note that while the majority of Americans believe that climate change is real, roughly 79, 80%, we still have about half of Americans who do not believe that climate change is caused by humans. So Donald Trump is, on the one hand, building anti-American sentiment by pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, but he is also reinforcing the non-scientific beliefs of roughly half of Americans that humans are impacting the climate. And this is why people were concerned about Trump's decision-making ability. Every day we read news about how China and India are making significant investments regarding climate change. And the US reaction is to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, which allies of the US will be happy about this? Is the EU going to say, wow, we're really glad that the United States is no longer going to be part of this agreement? Is Canada going to say, hey, you know what? Our alliance with the US is strengthened because Donald Trump has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement? No. And in the era that making coalitions and allies should be a top priority in foreign policy, Donald Trump is doing so much to create one of the biggest anti-US coalitions ever. And what's most disturbing to me about that is that there are Trumpists who like that. There are Trumpists who love the nationalistic approach of Trump, and they see other countries' frustration with the United States and with Trump as a good thing. The really important question for us to start keeping track of is, when the presidency is over, how long will it take to recover from the ridiculous decisions that Donald Trump is making, and more importantly, the repercussions of those decisions.
Today's program is made possible in part by WNYC's On the Media. On the Media is a way to maintain a level of frankness and transparency about the media that we consume. You can listen to On the Media, which is WNYC's weekly investigation into how media shapes our worldview. If you like the David Pakman Show, my guess is you would enjoy WNYC's On the Media. Brooke Gladstone and Bob Garfield are your hosts on a search for the truth in the 24-hour news cycle. You can catch them on their weekly podcast, On the Media, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.